Ladies and gentlemen, certainly Mr. Perangeli and I agree that Sergeant Hassel's death, tragedy doesn't even begin to explain. Okay? And I'm sure you've seen his friends and his family. They've been here. We saw some of them testify. And their testimony only illustrated what I'm sure a good father he was, what a good brother he was, what a good son he was. And even in his dad's testimony, I'm a father. It made me emotional too. But the hardest part about your job, ladies and gentlemen, the hardest part about all of our jobs, and none of us are immune to the emotion in this case, is that you have to, take the sympathy and the empathy that you feel for the entire Hassel family, for the friends and the brothers that he had. You need to take that sympathy and empathy, and you need to fold it up, you need to put it in your pocket. And you need to forget about it while you do your job as jurors. Because as the judge has discussed, your job as jurors is to determine the facts of this case without sympathy, without empathy. This case is not about wanting to provide a measure of satisfaction to the Hassel family. This case is about determining the facts of what happened, not trying to make a family feel better. And so with that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk about some of the things we heard. Now, I told you in the beginning of this case that most of the witnesses that the prosecutor called, and I think there were somewhere in the neighborhood of 26, I wouldn't have any questions for, because the vast majority of those witnesses could not provide any evidence, direct or circumstantial, about Kemia Hassel being involved in the murder of her husband. There's no question that Jeremy Cuellar is involved, and I think the vast majority of these witnesses confirm that. Certainly, the testimony of Ms. Wyatt in her discussion of all the cell phone movement, I don't think there's any question about what Jeremy Cuellar was doing. But what Mr. Perangeli said in his closing, he said, well, we know this. We know that she deleted her Snapchat account. We know why she deleted it. We know what was in those messages. We know that Jeremy Cuellar turned his cell phone off, and we know why he turned it back on. Well, we don't know those things, ladies and gentlemen. Those are what the prosecutor wants you to believe. That's his theory. He wants you to say, oh, well, they did this, and we know that. But you don't know that. You know my shirt is striped and my tie is purple because you can see it. What you don't know is what are pieces of evidence that we don't have, whether it's because Kemia deleted her Snapchat account for any of 100 reasons. You don't know what was in those messages. You can presume, and certainly the prosecutor does, he presumes that they are evidence of a plot to kill her husband. That is his theory, but that is not what the evidence shows. That is just what he wants you to think. Your job, ladies and gentlemen, is to think for yourselves. And don't let myself or Mr. Perangeli tell you what you need to decide. Your job, as I said, is to listen to the evidence and listen to the facts and come to your own conclusions. And if the conclusion is you don't know the answer to a question, then you don't know. Your job is not to just guess. To guess to make someone's family feel better, to guess to make me feel better, to make Mr. Perangeli feel better. So despite all of the witnesses that the government called, I'm going to talk about just a few. And the first I want to talk about is Specialist Hamilton. Now, based on Mr. Perangeli's closing, on his adamant statements that, well, Kemia Hassel she knew all these details. She knew all these details. If knowing details of this homicide is what it takes to be charged with being part of it, then I expect to see Jaquan Hamilton's name in the newspaper tomorrow, having been arrested for being part of a plot to murder Tyrone Hassel. Because he knew about this based on his own statement all the way back in June of 2018. He was told that Jeremy Cuellar, he wanted to do this, but he's got to go. He was told why it was going to happen. He was told when it was going to happen. He was told the why of the when it was going to happen. He knew all those details months in advance. But he's not been charged with any crime. Just because he knew. The interesting thing about Specialist Hamilton, one of the many interesting things, is he said that he was very close with Jeremy Cuellar. He said they were friends, close friends, for about a year, I think a year and a half before June of 2018. His words, we worked side by side every day. We lived together in Korea especially. And when he said that he was told of this plan, and he said, I think his words were, he seemed excited. When he was told of this plan, and he sort of questioned Jeremy a little bit, and Specialist Hamilton, he seemed kind of skittish. When Mr. Perangeli, I can't remember if it was he or I, asked, did you tell anybody? Did you tell anybody about this? He said, no, I didn't. And I specifically asked, I said, why didn't you tell anybody? And he said, I didn't think he would do it. The person who is closest to Mr. Cuellar, it sounds like, on base, the person who's worked side by side with him every day, the person who he's been good friends with for a year and a half, he didn't think he would do it. That is exactly what Kemia Hassel told Detective Longuski. I didn't think he would do it. Now then afterwards, Detective Longuski went to work on her, and he started telling her, well, that's not true. Well, you got to tell me what's honest. You got to get out in front of this. She told Detective Longuski she didn't think it would happen. Just like Specialist Hamilton said, I didn't think it would happen. They were both very unfortunately mistaken about the depths, I don't like this word, but of the ability to be a monster that Jeremy Cuellar clearly had. Neither of them believed that he would do this. And yet again, I say Specialist Hamilton has not been charged with any crime, even though he knew, even though he didn't believe it would happen. Just like Kemia said, she didn't believe it would happen. She didn't think it would end up like this. The aftermath of the homicide, Specialist Hamilton said he was in, I think, Jersey, and he said he heard about the murder, and he said he suspected, and then he came back to Georgia. And when he's back from Georgia, he says that it's right after they salute the flag. It's about 6:45, and Jeremy Cuellar comes to him and he says, I did it. And I know you can't take notes, ladies and gentlemen, but obviously we can. And he said, I had to do what I had to do. That's what Jeremy Cuellar said. And what struck me, quite frankly, is disturbing, is he said he was like happy about it. He was happy that it was done, and quite frankly, it seems like he couldn't wait to come back and brag to his friend about what he had done. And what's interesting, ladies and gentlemen, after that is, now Mr. Perangeli indicated a number of times, well, the police spoke with Kemia, and she never said anything about Jeremy Cuellar, and she waited days before she said anything about it. Well, so did Specialist Hamilton. He was told intimate details of the murder. Jeremy Cuellar apparently told him that he shot Tyrone Hassel, and then when he was on the ground, he shot him again. He sat with that information for 4 days. And it was only after those 4 days that he went and reported this. And again, if Kemia Hassel, knowing about this plot, makes her guilty of something, then I say again, then where are Specialist Hamilton's charges? Just because he knew about the details, does that mean that he was involved in this? Of course it doesn't. Any more than Kemia Hassel being able to give some details makes her guilty of it. The other witness that I want to talk about very briefly is Detective Fleming from Georgia. And I asked her, the only real questions I asked, if you recall, is after she had an opportunity, she went through and you saw exhibits, 38 through 47. You saw all of the things in Jeremy Cuellar's car. You saw the Walmart receipt that we've gone over. You saw bullets. You saw bags. You saw all kinds of stuff in his car. And then she had an opportunity to go all through his things, She went to the home. She said there was a roommate there. He let them in. And she had the full opportunity to search through all of Jeremy Cuellar's things. And I don't think that she did a bad job. I don't think Mr. Perangeli will say she did a half-assed job of searching. She did a full and diligent search. She knew what she was looking for. She cataloged all of the evidence that she thought was relevant based on the information she had been given. And what I thought was interesting, ladies and gentlemen, is that nothing in that apartment, nothing in that home, nothing in that bedroom had anything to do with Kemia Hassel. According to the prosecutor, the affair that she and Mr. Cuellar had, and you heard from the witnesses, I think it was Sergeant Burks, they couldn't keep their hands off each other. He said he saw them in bed numerous times. He said they would go to the gym together, they would walk around together. He said even their just regular interactions caused him concern. So much so that he contacted Sergeant Hassel. They're having this intimate affair in Korea, which doesn't, by the way, prove that Kemia plotted to kill her husband. They have this can't keep their hands off each other affair. They come home, and presumably the affair is still going on, and yet there is nothing, not even a, like a vanilla flavored chapstick, not even a hair tie, nothing that would even remotely suggest that Kemia Hassel or any other female had been in that room. Because she wasn't there. Because whatever this affair was in Korea stayed in Korea. The only thing that came back was what I can only describe as the sick and twisted plan that Jeremy Cuellar had to murder Tyrone Hassel. Nothing in Jeremy Cuellar's home links Kemia Hassel to any further relationship with him because there was no further relationship, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Perangeli wants you to jump to that conclusion to say, oh, well, they were clearly still having a relationship, but the evidence doesn't show that it existed because it didn't. The evidence we don't have shows you that things don't exist. Now, obviously, ladies and gentlemen, the most important witness that I want to talk about is Detective Law&Crime. And, he said he'd been doing this for, I think he said 24, 25 years. I've been doing it about half as long. And he's conducted, I think he said 3,000 or 4,000 interviews. I've probably seen several hundred. And I will say there is a reason why people from all over the state hire him to go speak for them, to teach them, to show them the ropes. He is by far the best that I've ever seen. No question about it. He is as skilled an interviewer as I have ever seen. And what he did with all of his skills and all of his abilities is he walked into a perfect storm. And by that, what I mean, ladies and gentlemen, is Kemia Hassel comes to Lansing. And I think we can dispense with this notion of, oh, well, it was her idea to go there. As if Kemia Hassel, after speaking with the detectives for an hour, decided, hey, how about this, guys? I want to go to Lansing at 11 o'clock at night so I can talk to somebody else. Of course, that was not her idea, ladies and gentlemen. It was the suggestion, and I think Sergeant Lanier even said, it was their suggestion that they go to Lansing. And she said, sure, fine, I'll go. Not hiding, not refusing to talk to anybody, but she was willing to tell them what she'd already told them a number of times. So not only by the time does Kemia get there, she's been with the police since 8 o'clock. I think they arrive at about 1 o'clock a.m. She spends the next hour or so, hour and a quarter, denying having any involvement. So we've got, at that point, it's about 2:30. So she's now been in police custody for 6.5 hours. She hasn't slept. She hasn't eaten. And then, and she's a young woman. There's been no evidence that she certainly hasn't gone through anything like this before. And now here comes, and I'm not being facetious, ladies and gentlemen, like the top gun, the guy, the best of the best. He comes into this situation. And the first thing he does, ladies and gentlemen, after she's denied everything, okay, is, and you heard him say it himself, it's not like TV, they don't like shine the bright light in your face, because that doesn't work. Confronting people and getting angry with them, that doesn't work. What he does is he talks softly, and he expresses concern, and he tries to earn her trust. And in his own questions, he said, yeah, or in his own answers, yeah, I tried to earn her trust so that she would believe me. So that when I lie to her, she'll believe me. So that when I tell her things that, you know.
I'm going to object to the characterization, he never testified when I lied to her.
I'm paraphrasing, Judge. So that,
the jury will use their collective memories as to his testimony.
thank you. So that when I tell her things like Jeremy Cuellar is in custody that aren't true, that he's getting ready to roll over on you, that she'll believe me. Now, ladies and gentlemen, you saw that I asked Detective Longuski about his positioning in the room, okay, where he was, how he was seated. And I've been to these seminars too, ladies and gentlemen, and what these guys do is all calculated. Everything is calculated. So for example, if I'm standing and we're talking and I'm sort of standing like this, my arms are crossed, I'm closed off to you. I'm in a defensive position. I'm literally putting barriers between you and me. On the other hand, if I stand here and I talk to you, and my arms are open, and I'm clearly showing that I'm receptive, I'm showing an openness, and in a weird way, you don't think about it like this, but I'm showing that I'm unarmed. Okay, I don't have anything that I want to use against you, not just like to physically attack you, but metaphorically speaking. I'm open, I have nothing to hide. And in fact, if you go to a casino and you ever see dealers switch out, you will see they sort of do this thing to show they have nothing to hide. Okay? That's the kind of body language that is often employed in these investigations. And I would say, ladies and gentlemen, that when Detective Longuski, when he was first doing the interview, he did testify. He said, well, I was seated back in my chair and I was kind of leaned back and I was taking notes and I was doing whatever I was doing. And then when he finishes the interview, after Kemia has been denying being involved in this for hours and hours, what he does then, ladies and gentlemen, is he goes from, leaned back, kind of casual, just taking notes, Detective Longuski, to he leans in, he bends forward, he starts talking to her, and he's trying to build that relationship. He's trying to get her to trust him. And that's the kind of manipulation. And when I said, do you manipulate these people? He said yes. That's the kind of manipulation I'm talking about. And I even feel it in my own body. When I'm sitting up here, I'm talking a little differently. And then I lean in, and you're a little more relaxed. And that's the kind of tactics that these people use, ladies and gentlemen. And that's not to say Detective Longuski's a bad guy. That's what his job is. But these are the tactics, the manipulative tactics, thank you, sir, that are used. We talked about parroting. And I just use parroting, I just casually chose that phrase. But when you listen to the clips that Mr. Perangeli played for you, there really was parroting. Detective Longuski would say, oh, you weren't really getting the love you wanted at home. And Kemia said, yeah, I wasn't getting the love I wanted at home. He said, money was involved, wasn't it? She said, yeah, money was involved. In those videos, he said, well, the plan was to hook up when you got back to Georgia, right? She said, yeah, we were going to hook up when we got back to Georgia. He said, are those Snapchat messages going to make it look like you were pushing it? She said, yeah, it'll make it look like I was pushing it. He said, did he come up each night? She said, yeah, he came up each night. He said, did you talk to each other each day? She said, yeah, we talked to each other each day. It wasn't just an echo, which maybe would have been a more appropriate phrase, ladies and gentlemen. She was literally parroting the things that he was saying back to her. And that was after, ladies and gentlemen, after the things that are what these guys do. Okay? He sat her down, and he built that trust, and I'm sure you heard, because I made a point of mentioning it at opening, he said, you got to get out in front of this. You got to get out in front of this. He must have said that a dozen times. You got to get out of this for Chunk. Why do you think he's using the name Chunk? Because he wants to endear himself to her. He wants her to like him so that she will say what she thinks will please him. You got to get out in front of this. That's like something you see a PR person say to a Hollywood celebrity who gets in trouble. You know, they say, hey, look, you got to get out in front of this. You got to make sure you control the story. You got to do what's best for you. And in the Miranda warnings, it says, were you threatened with anything? She says no. But ladies and gentlemen, I would argue that you got to get out in front of this repeatedly is a subtle, though obvious threat. Because if you don't get out in front of this, what's going to happen? Obviously, something bad is going to happen. If you don't get out in front of this, if you don't get out in front of Jeremy Cuellar, something bad will happen to you. He can't say what, because he doesn't know. But I would argue, ladies and gentlemen, that is an implicit threat. If you don't get out in front of this, I know you've been saying you had nothing to do with this all along. But if you don't tell me something different, something bad could happen. Jeremy Cuellar could roll on you. I'm paraphrasing. He could start making statements against you, even though we know that didn't happen once he was taken into custody after this interview. The thing that struck me the most, ladies and gentlemen, is that while he was giving this, soliloquy of what a great person you are, and you got to think about your family, and you got to think about your son, is he said, you got to get out in front of this because you have a future with your son. But ladies and gentlemen, if she is implicating herself in a plot to kill her husband, what kind of future does she have? What kind of future does she have confessing to first-degree murder? None. These are just all of the things, all of the manipulative tactics that Detective Longusky employed. And like I said, they work. They work beautifully. They work to the tune of Kemia Hassel completely changing her story for no other reason than, well, Detective Longusky asked her to. The last thing I want to mention about Detective Longusky is, the co-signing of the loan. Okay, and I'm going to go to bat for you. And by the way, that is a promise, ladies and gentlemen. He doesn't say, I promise. But when he says, I'll go to bat for you, he's implicitly promising he's going to do something for her. And Mr. Perangeli on his cross, or his redirect, said, well, you said that before you knew all the details. You said that before you knew the extent to what she supposedly was involved in. And of course, he said, yeah, that's right. But the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, as you heard, Detective Longusky's been doing this for 25 years. He knows full well, just like Mr. Perangeli talked about in his opening, whether you are the person who commits the robbery, or you are the person who planned it, or you are simply the person who just walked up to the bank and held the door open while the crew of guys ran in, robbed the place, shot up the place, and ran out. She is just as involved by having a minimal involvement. So this idea, well, I didn't know how many details there would be, he knows full well any time, any implication she makes that she's involved in this in any way, that she's, as my old boss used to say, she's in the soup. Okay, she's in. Any implication she makes of herself puts her on the hook potentially for first-degree murder. And that is the whole case, ladies and gentlemen. The whole issue is, do you believe that Kemia Hassel made those statements because she had been manipulated by a pro? She had been denying all of this stuff for days, weeks, hours. And it was only after Detective Longusky went to work that she changed her story. She knew a lot of details, ladies and gentlemen. So did Specialist Hamilton. She had an affair with Jeremy Cuellar. That does not prove that she was part of a plot to murder her husband. Does it make her a bad wife? Sure. Does it make her a person who lacks honor? Sure. But that doesn't prove a plot. That doesn't prove intent. I don't doubt she knew about it, ladies and gentlemen. She admitted that she knew about it. And in fact, in those phone calls, which, by the way, were taken just, if you listen to under Sheriff Height, those phone calls were from just after she got back. The first one was, I think, 6:30 a.m. So she had been up in Lansing that whole night and then had been brought back down and processed, and that's when she made that statement. So at that point, she still hadn't slept. She still hadn't, presumably, well, I shouldn't say she hadn't eaten because we don't know, but she had been in police custody this entire time. And what did she say as well when she spoke with her mom? This is not something I thought would end up like this. She may well have known what was going on. And notice I'm not saying, ladies and gentlemen, she knew, because I'm not going to put thoughts in your head. But I think we can safely presume that she knew. But she, like Specialist Hamilton, who indicated, yeah, I feel guilty because I could have stopped it, but I didn't. She understandably feels guilt because she could have stopped this and didn't. But in her words, I didn't think that would happen. Just like Specialist Hamilton said, I didn't think this would happen. I knew about it, I understood what he was telling me, but I didn't think it would happen. And the reason that's so important, ladies and gentlemen, is you'll get a verdict form. And that verdict form has a couple different options. Option number one is not guilty of first-degree murder. Option number two is guilty of first-degree murder. But option number three is guilty of second-degree murder. And what that does, ladies and gentlemen, second-degree murder, and Mr. Perangeli alluded to it, there's going to be a chart that has elements of first degree and elements of second degree. And in the element of second-degree murder, it says that you knowingly created a high risk of death. And ladies and gentlemen, I would tell you, or I would argue to you, that Kemia Hassel did not really think this was going to happen, much like Specialist Hamilton did. Did she tell Jeremy to stop it? No, she didn't. No more than Specialist Hamilton did. Did she knowingly or unknowingly create this high risk by not stopping him? Possibly. But that is also a big jump, ladies and gentlemen. The jump that the prosecutor wants you to make is a very significant one. It's a very large one, because it's based on things that we don't know. The last thing I want to talk about, ladies and gentlemen, is the ethereal concept of beyond a reasonable doubt. Okay? And the judge will read you an instruction, and part of it says, well, a reasonable doubt is simply a doubt that is reasonable. Well, that's not really helpful. What I will give to you, ladies and gentlemen, is an example we talked about when we picked this jury. We talked about buying a house. And we said that there are lots of reasons why you may like a house. Okay? You may like the school district, you may like the roof, you may like the yard, you may like the kitchen, you might not like the kitchen. And you have a decision to make. The issue is not, is this a house? Okay? We know that a crime was committed. We know that Tyrone Hassel was brutally and heartbreakingly gunned down. We know that. The issue is Kemia Hassel responsible? And so when you think of all the evidence in this case, I want you to think about that house and think about, yes, okay, there is a roof and there is aluminum siding and there is a nice yard, but there may be issues with the heating and cooling system. There may be issues with the school district. And those are things that when you think about purchasing a house, you pause. You hesitate because you have a doubt about whether or not you should buy this house, and that doubt is reasonable because it's based on the evidence that you have. It's not a question of, is this a house? It's a question of, are you going to buy it? In this case, ladies and gentlemen, there's ample evidence that suggests that simply because Kemia Hassel knew of the details does not prove that she was involved, that the statement that she made implicating herself was the result of a long stay in police custody, followed by repeated denials, followed by manipulation, again, Detective Longuski's agreed upon word, manipulation, it was only then that she began giving details, parroting him, as I read to you. Those are the only reasons that she made those statements, ladies and gentlemen. And without those statements, the prosecution has no case against Kemia Hassel. And I hope you return a fair and just verdict in this case. Thank you. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. We're ready for Mr. Pranger's rebuttal, but I think we're going to take a brief 1-minute stretch. Come on up to the podium, and we'd have everybody stand for just a minute.